Assessments are a vital component of education. When designing instruction, educators and instructional designers should use a variety of assessments to measure student learning and to improve future student performance. This video will share a variety of assessments that can be used when developing instruction. This video will include 8 types of assessments that can be used in education. We will also include examples and the pros and cons of each type of assessment. It is important to note that each of the assessments presented throughout this video have a place in education. Educators and instructional designers should select the assessment best suited for their audience and learning outcomes, but we believe a variety of assessments should be used in each educational setting. Why should a variety of assessments be used? Limiting instruction to one type of assessment can be detrimental to learner mastery of learning outcomes. Varied assessments can motivate and engage learners, assess a broader range of skills, deter plagiarism, provide real-world applicability, allow a deeper understanding of the subject versus memorization of key concepts, and aid in equitable learning opportunities for all learners. Before we dive into the different types of assessments that you can use in your lessons, we want to emphasize the importance of selecting assessments appropriate for the learning outcomes. When deciding what assessment method you would like to use, your first step should be to evaluate your learning outcomes. Using Bloom's taxonomy, your learning outcomes should describe measurable objectives that learners can perform or demonstrate upon completion of the lesson. The assessment you select should align with the level of thinking you want learners to perform. For example, if your biology course learning outcome asks learners to identify plant and animal cells, a multiple-choice quiz could assess learners' identification of these concepts. However, in this case, it would not be appropriate for learners to do a presentation explaining these concepts in depth. Likewise, if your leadership course's learning outcome asks learners to recommend approaches to resolve diverse conflict situations, a multiple-choice quiz would not be appropriate. Instead, you may ask learners to read a case study and provide recommendations in a written assignment. Now that you know how to select the appropriate assessment for your instruction, we will dive into the various assessments you can use in your educational settings.
The first assessment we will look at will be pre-assessment or diagnostic assessment. This assessment is conducted before instruction and is used to evaluate prior knowledge of the learners. It is a valuable tool that allows the instructor to tailor the course to the knowledge base of the learners. It is important to structure the assessment to address content that has been planned for instruction. This type of assessment also gives students a preview of the topic. In student-centered learning, the assessment could shape the course of instruction to meet the interest of the learners. There are numerous examples such as pre-tests, class exercises, class discussions, questionnaires, and student observations that prepare instructors and students for productive learning sessions. Just like every assessment, there are advantages and disadvantages that affect the usefulness of this assessment. The advantages of pre-assessments are that they can be used to determine knowledge level about a subject. It could allow students to know what topics will be taught in future instruction. It also allows instructors to differentiate learning requirements for students. And finally, the assessment establishes a benchmark to compare student learning during instruction and after lessons are complete. There are some disadvantages to this type of assessment. It could incorrectly group students into the wrong ability level. If it is a questionnaire or survey, the pre-assessment may not be helpful if students don't know how to assess their own knowledge level. It also may not be useful if it is a new subject for students. The pre-assessment may only address basic knowledge, which may not be enough to make instructional or learning design improvements. And lastly, it may not be useful for post-assessment, if not structured correctly. Next, we will talk about 3 assessments that allow instructors to gauge progress and determine students' level of learning throughout and after instruction. First is formative assessment, which is used to gather information on the learner's progress and determine the effectiveness of the instructor's teaching method. Results are used to give in-process feedback about what students are learning, so instructional approaches, teaching materials, and academic support can be modified to meet students' needs. These types of assessments are usually not graded, can be informal in nature, and may take a variety of forms such as peer and self-assessment, daily summary readings, concept mapping, and checklists. Formative assessments are generally low stakes, which means that they have low or no point value. These assessments work well because they evaluate students on the same criterion but could falsely diagnose good students with learning issues. The next assessment is summative, which evaluates student learning at the end of an instructional unit by comparing student performance against a standard or benchmark. Summative assessment usually involves students receiving a grade that indicates their level of performance, which could be a percentage, pass, fail, or some other form of scaled grade. Results are often recorded as scores or grades that are then factored into a student's permanent academic record. Some examples include ACT or SAT and state assessments. The advantage of these assessments is that they are easy to test with tools such as checklists and multiple choice questions. The results, however, may be misinterpreted to indicate teachers' performance and used to determine funding level. After summative, there is confirmative assessment, which tests students' ability to retain information and to apply what they have learned. Examples include post-tests, observations, and follow-on projects. This will let instructors determine if more advanced content can be attempted. Similar to the other assessments, confirmative assessment have the advantage of accessing students' learning either formally or informally. Results can be used to adjust instruction for the next group of students. Using this assessment can also be a disadvantage if the instructor is using this as indicator of future performance for another group of learners. In addition to these 4 assessments, there are 4 more important assessments that can be used to provide information to instructors and learners.
The 5th type of assessment we will share in this video is norm-referenced assessments. Norm-referenced assessments show where individual learners are in comparison to other learners. The chapter Norm Referencing, in the book Key Concepts in Educational Assessment, states that norm referencing enables assessors to sort individuals across a range of abilities or aptitudes. Individual learning is evaluated and graded by judging each learner's performance against that of a larger group of people in the same age group or at the same stage or level of learning. The larger group is known as the norm or normative group. Examples of norm-referenced assessments include tests based on a curve, debates, competitions, job interviews, auditions, ACT tests, and IQ tests. The advantages of norm-referenced assessments are they are inexpensive to create and simple to administer. They can help differentiate learners by identifying learners who have specific educational needs, are considered more objective than other assessment methods, and they can help decrease biases or favoritism. The disadvantages of norm-referenced assessments are they can encourage instructors to view learners in terms of a bell curve. They can lead to misused assessment for learning outcomes. For example, multiple choice tests are the dominant norm-referenced format, and, as we mentioned earlier, these are better suited to measuring memorization of facts versus more complex forms of thinking. Lastly, an over-reliance on norm-reference tests can lead to inadvertent discrimination. The next type of assessment on our list is criterion-referenced assessments. Criterion-referenced assessments compare an individual learner's performance to a pre-established criteria or objective. In this case, the outcome measures the learner's own performance versus comparing learners against each other's performance. Examples of criterion-referenced assessments include pre- and post-tests, licensure or certification exams, standardized tests, multiple choice, true-false, open-ended, or a combination of any of these quiz questions. The advantages of criterion-referenced assessments are they are better suited for measuring learning progress than norm-referenced exams. They can be viewed as fairer than norm-referenced tests because they don't compare the performance of learners, and they can be constructed with open-ended questions that require learners to use higher-level cognitive skills. The disadvantages of criterion-referenced assessments are they are only as accurate or fair as the learning standards upon which they were created. They may not appropriately align with learning standards, they can be highly subjective, and if the tests primarily utilize multiple choice questions, they will promote memorization versus higher-level thinking. The 7th assessment on our list is ipsative assessments. In the chapter Ipsative Assessment in the book Key Concepts in Educational Assessment, ipsative assessments are described as a mode of assessment in which the assessed individual is compared to themselves either in the same field through time or in comparison with other fields, and can be described in terms of personal best. Examples of ipsative assessments include comparisons and reflections on at least 2 individual performances throughout a period of time, self-reflection papers on previous and current work, pre- and post-tests, and draft assessments. The advantages of ipsative assessments are they emphasize the progress learners are making, can be motivating to learners by highlighting how they can improve, encourage learners to self-assess, and can increase the likelihood of the learners acting on feedback. The disadvantages of ipsative assessments are they have to span over a longer duration than other types of assessments, they need to allow for personalized comparisons, they are labor-intensive for instructors, and learners need to be educated in the process of identifying quality. The last type of assessment we will be sharing are alternative assessments. Alternative assessments, also called authentic assessments, are used to determine what students can or cannot do in comparison to what they know or do not know. According to Brigham Young University, alternative assessments measure applied proficiency more than measures knowledge. Examples of alternative assessments include portfolios, project work, papers demonstrating learners' understanding of outcomes, performance of meaningful tasks, open test, collaborative testing, summaries or reports, concept maps, and interviews. The advantages of alternative assessments are they provide a means of assessing valued skills that cannot be directly assessed with traditional tests. They provide a more realistic setting for learners to apply their knowledge to real-life situations or solve practical problems. They focus on learner performance and the quality of work. They can be easily aligned with established learning outcomes. They encourage learners to think outside the box, and they can help build learner critical thinking and communication skills. The disadvantages of alternative assessments are they can be time-consuming to create and grade, they are more subjective than other assessments, they can be impacted by instructor bias on performance.
In closing, we want to reiterate that when deciding what assessment method you would like to use, your first step should be to evaluate your learning outcomes. Using Bloom's taxonomy, your learning outcomes should describe measurable objectives. The assessments you select should align with the level of thinking you want students to perform. We presented 8 types of assessments that can be used in education today. We should view assessments not only as moments to gauge the knowledge base of learners, but as opportunities to engage learners in meaningful learning.